So the subject that I would like to discuss today is the subject of Sannyas and Tyaga. Initially, Hindu religion was not encouraging renunciation externally. So all the renunciates, all those who had given up the world, all those who had given up their families and duties and responsibilities, were those who belonged to the Shramana philosophies. By Shramana philosophies, we can understand them as Buddhism and Jainism, which have survived till today. But there were also Parivrarajakas, there were also Ajivikas, there were also so many other renunciate philosophies, where people wandered with their disciples from village to village, and they performed no useful work. They fed off the people who were doing the work. They were considered by Vedic followers as social parasites. But over a period of time, the idea of renunciation and renunciates gradually crept in to Vedic religion. And let us say by the 15th century, there were maybe around 20 Sannyas Upanishads, which described the behavior of those who had renounced the world and described how they should behave. But if you go further back, if you go even to Manusmriti, the only mention of sannyas is that when a person chooses to renounce the world and chooses to select death, when he is physically disabled and he is completely ill and unable to move around comfortably, he drags himself out into the world and away from civilization so that nature can take its course and carry him away. So this is what is described in the original Manusmriti. The Bhagavad Gita is one step further than that. By then, what has happened is that too many people have already begun to take sannyas or external renunciation. And thus, they have given up their prescribed duties, they've given up their families, they've given up their wives and children. And having renounced the world, they have begun to live off those who are actually functioning and working hard within the world and doing their duty. So the Bhagavad Gita has a completely different view on this. And the Bhagavad Gita insists that everyone should do their duty. We will come to that a little later. But first, I would like to give you some idea of the rules and regulations of sannyas as given in the Sannyas Upanishads. As I said, there are 20 of them, but there's a repetition in a lot of them. So I will just give you briefly what they are all about. So broadly, the Sannyas Upanishads, which are like, shall we say, Kshatriyaniya Upanishad, then you have the various other Upanishads, which describe the conduct, like Aruni Upanishad, one of the earliest, the Jabal Upanishad, the Nirvana Upanishad, and so on and so forth. So all of them describe how the sannyasi should conduct himself and how he should live. And broadly, the sannyasis are divided into 4 divisions. The first is a person who wishes to renounce the world or at least distance himself from all his attachments. He is not keeping too well, cannot sustain or maintain himself. So his son constructs a hut for him just outside the town, where he lives alone without contact with any humankind. And he arranges to send food to his father every day. So this person looks every bit like you would expect a sannyasi to look. The only difference is he doesn't move around, he just stays in one place and he gets fed by his own family. This is called Kuti Chakra Sannyas. The second type of sannyasi is called Bahudaka Sannyasi. So Bahudaka Sannyasi is one who lives usually at a confluence of rivers, at a tirthasthan, at a holy place, a place of pilgrimage. And there he lives away from general group of people, and he only seeks humankind when he moves around to collect food for his sustenance or maintenance. Of course, that sustenance and maintenance is limited. They're not supposed to eat more than 8 mouthfuls, or 8 mouthfuls of food is all that they're permitted to eat. Then you come to what we call as the Hansa Sannyasis. The Hansa Sannyasis are those who move around. They travel around from one place to another. And while they move around from one place to another, even in the same place of pilgrimage, what they do is they do not visit the same places for taking bhiksha. So they take their bhiksha from different homes so that there is no burden on anybody and they are not dependent on anyone. You have then the Paramhansa. The Paramhansa Sannyasi is the one who moves around all the time. So he does not stay more than one night under the same roof. He does not stay more than 3 nights in the same town or 5 nights in the same city. And thus he is constantly moving around. He does not go back to any of the places he lived in his Purva ashram. That means he never goes. If he lived in a particular place, he never visits that place again so that he doesn't meet anybody he knows. And he never goes back to any place he has previously visited, so that he forms no attachments. He keeps moving around from one place to another. And lastly, you have what we know as the Avdut Sannyasi. The Avadut Sannyasi is one who, when you look at him, he looks like a madman. Unlike the others, he does not bathe 3 times a day. He does not shave his head, or he does not carry a tridanda, or he doesn't wear orange robes. Sometimes he's half naked, sometimes he is dressed. When you look at him, he looks as if he is a madman from the stare in his eyes. He does not speak to anyone. He does not criticize anyone. And he moves around like a man who is totally unconscious to the world. This is known as the Avdut Sannyasi. So these are the various types of sannyasis. And I'm sharing this with you because obviously this was similar to what Arjuna wanted to do on the battlefield. Because Arjuna says, why should I go and kill my relatives? Why should I go and kill my teachers? Why should I kill grandfather, cousins, etc.? How much better that I should throw down my weapons and that I should go around and beg like a monk. That is like a sannyasi. So the whole Bhagavad Gita is Krishna convincing him that the path of sannyas is not meant for you. There are other texts which are followed by so many people, which recommend sannyas, which recommend giving up the world, etc. But Bhagavad Gita certainly is not one of them. Bhagavad Gita specifically is against Arjun taking sannyas. It is specifically against Arjun giving up his duties. It is against Arjun giving up his families. It is against Arjun giving up his brothers. And it insists that he should continue to live in the world free from fear of karma, which is the primary fear of Arjuna. And he can live in the world free from karma. Krishna explains to him, provided you live in the world externally like anyone would, but internally being detached from everyone. So, Krishna convinces Arjun that the idea of renouncing the external world does not give you freedom. That the living in the external world, free of all the attachments of the external world physically, roaming around like a monk, like a sannyasi, even like an avdut, is not going to give you salvation. But if you do your duty within the world, if you fulfill your duties, yes, if you fulfill all your duties and responsibilities to your parents, to your spouse, to your children, to your society, to your nation, if you do that, you can attain salvation if you do it in a spirit of internal renunciation and devotion. So Krishna says that there are two types of sannyas. There is an external sannyas, which was essentially a Shramana philosophy. And through Advait philosophy, it came in also into Vedic philosophy, the practitioners of Vedic philosophy. But essentially, Vedic philosophers never recommended external sannyas. The whole principle of Vedic philosophy was to do one's duty towards everybody around them, including the devatas. And by doing so, one would attain a superior birth, heaven, and rebirth in a superior family with more wealth, more beauty, and so on. But Krishna said to Arjun that even the common sense idea is that you do not need to come back into this world. He agreed with the Shramanas on one basic point, that this world is a place of misery. He pointed out that this world is a dukhalayam ashashvatam, a place of misery where everything is temporary. He told Arjun that this is anityam asukham lokam, that this is a place of misery where nothing lasts, no lasting happiness can be found. He tells Arjun again that janma, mrityu, jara, vyadhi, dukha, doshanu, darshanam, that birth, death, old age, disease, fault, misfortune, and happiness, they're all guaranteed to everybody. So this is what Krishna tells him, that they are right about this part of the philosophy. But he said, you can escape the cycle of birth and death You can escape misery in this life itself. You can reduce your suffering in this life. You can indeed transcend your suffering in this life. If you move around in the world in a spirit of internal renunciation and devotion to God. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna clearly states, unequivocally, unambiguously, without any doubt, indubitably, that working in the world with the spirit of devotion and renunciation is superior to renouncing the world externally. And Krishna says, Sannyasas karma yogascha nihashrayasya karao bhav. Tayastu karma sannyasat karma yogo vishishyate. He points out to Arjuna that there are two paths that people use to attain salvation. One is to renounce the world externally, and the other is to work in the world in a spirit of devotion and internal renunciation. And he says clearly that between the two, to do your duty, to fulfill your responsibilities, to do your dharma is by far superior. It is by far superior. Sannyasas karma yogascha nihashrayasya karamabhav tayostu karma sannyasat karma yogo vishishyate. To engage in doing your duties in a spirit of devotion and internal renunciation with attachment to God, with yoga, that is by far superior. Indeed, he warns Arjuna that if you renounce the world externally, if you give up your connections to the world, you will get sorrow unless you have attained union with God. Sannyasastu mahabhavo dukkham aptama yogatah yoga yukta munir brahma na chirena adi gacchati. So he says, if you, without having attained union with God, if you give up the external world, you will only get great sorrow. You will get great sorrow. But if you work in the world in a spirit of devotion and renunciation to attain union with God, you will get salvation without delay. You will get mukti, moksha. You will get salvation, liberation from the cycle of birth and death without any delay. Clearly, he says, unequivocally, without any doubt, indubitably. So, Krishna, in fact, says that even if you have attained union with God, even if you have attained union with God, don't give up the world. Why? He says, because if you give up the world, everyone will think that that is the way to go and everyone will give up their duties and the whole world will be put into confusion. Yeah, but he says, if you are enlightened and you function in the world with devotion, the rest of the world will follow you, attaining salvation and also fulfilling dharma within this world. Krishna says very clearly in the Bhagavad Gita, Yad yad acharati shreshtastada devataro jana sa yad pramanam kurute lokastadanuvartate. So Krishna says to Arjuna, first, that if you are not united with God and you go ahead and renounce the world, you will get only sorrow. And if you are united with God, you have a responsibility to set an example with your behavior and teach people in the world to perform their duties. So on both counts, Krishna explains that one should not take external sannyas. That indeed, if you have not got union with God and you give up the world, you are in great misery and sorrow because you've given up the pleasures of the world and you've also given up. You have not yet attained union with God, which would give you happiness, bliss, contentment. On the other hand, if you have attained union with God, by renouncing the world, you will set a bad example to people around you, and everyone will think that is the way that one can attain salvation. So people will follow in your footsteps. But if you indeed work in the world with devotion, having attained salvation, then you will set the correct example to the rest of them. So Krishna says very clearly in the Bhagavad Gita, repeatedly, that what is sannyas? And he says that moving around in the world with your mind completely detached from everything, that is sannyas. Just like he says, Padma Patram Ivam Vasi. So he says, even if you're a yogi, even if your union with God is begun, he says very clearly, Kayena Manasa Buddhaya Kevaler Indriyerapi Yogina Karma Kurvanti Sangam Tyaktva Atma Shuddhaye. With your limbs, with your senses, with your mind, with your intelligence, you engage in performing work for the sake of the purification of your soul. So even yogis engage in work for the purification of their soul. In fact, he says that when you live in the world and you continue to work as an offering to God, Brahmanya adhaya karmani sangam tyaktva karoti yaha. Lipyate na sa papena padma patram ivam vasa. So just like a lotus leaf lives in water, but it is never wet, so also you will live in the world with everybody else, doing your duty, fulfilling your responsibilities, but yet being untouched by the world, free from suffering, free from joy and sorrow, honor and dishonor, heat and cold, with a mind that is completely in perfect contentment, invulnerable to the slings and arrows of misfortune or fortune. You will be able to do that if you function in the world, performing your duties in a spirit of devotion and renunciation. So the sannyas of Bhagavad Gita is internal sannyas. In fact, he comes to establish dharma versus adharma. Shramana philosophy speaks about renouncing the world externally, therefore it is adharma. Sannyasa is renouncing the world externally, that is why it is adharma. And Krishna comes to teach you dharma, which is to do your duty in a spirit of devotion and renunciation. Asakta buddhir sarvatra jitatma vigata spriha naishkarmyam paramam siddhim sannyasen adhigacchati. So Krishna is explaining what is sannyas, what is his definition of sannyas. And when Krishna explains his definition of sannyas, he clearly says Asakta buddhir sarvatra, when your mind is detached from everything around you. Jitatma vigataspriya, with senses fully controlled, with mind completely detached from everything around you. He says that is sannyas. On the other, when he talks even of family life, he says in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Asakta anabhishwanga putra dara grihadishu. So, even with your family, you fulfill all your duties, give them perfect love, unmotivated, uninterrupted love you give to your family. But do not cling to your family. Do not become attached to your family. Do not have expectations from your family. Asakta anabhishwangaha. So in this way, you will perform your duties with perfection. Give love and compassion with perfection. But you will not be the clingy person. You will not be the person who's dependent on, whose happiness is dependent on what they are doing or not doing. You will not expect them to do something for you, which if they don't do, you will be unhappy. So Krishna explains what sannyas is. And sannyas is living in the world, doing your duties without expecting anything in return for your labor. See, when we work, we expect something in return. We expect, first of all, money, which gives us all physical things. Then we expect to enjoy the work that we are doing, which is also an emotional or intellectual thing. We also expect to learn something while working. Otherwise, what's the use of working if we are not learning anything? So that is also expectation of fruit at an intellectual level. So at the physical level, we expect money. At the emotional level, we expect to enjoy ourselves. We want to have companionship. We want to have good relationships. You want to have a good uh, group of friends at your place of work. So this is for your mind. You want that fruit. You want to learn something while you're working. So that desire to learn something is fruit for the intellect. And then you want acknowledgement. You want to be praised. You want to receive acknowledgement. That is indeed fruit for the ego. But when you work wherever you are, fulfilling your duties in a spirit of renunciation and devotion, without considering yourself to be the doer, and indeed without aspiring for the fruit. That, my friends, is an offering it to God that is called sannyas. Karmanyevadakaraste ma phaleshu kadachan ma karma phala hetu durmati sangaspor karmani. So you have a right to do your duty, but you do not have the right to the fruit. It's very important. Do not consider yourself to be the doer of the activity. And indeed, do not expect to give up your work and abstain from work. Don't exercise your own power. So, this is what Krishna recommends. So, in the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, you actually come across Krishna, where Krishna is being asked by Arjuna, can you again tell me what is the difference between Sanyasa and Tyaga. What is the difference between sannyas and Tyaga? I want to know what is the nature of sannyas and what is the nature of Tyaga. And I want to know the difference between the two. Is how the 18th chapter begins. So Krishna answers Arjuna, and Krishna says, Shri Bhagwan Uvacha, Supreme Lord said, Kamyanam karmanam nyasam sannyasam kavayo vidu sarva karma phala tyagam prahus tyagam vichakshana. So Krishna says to Arjuna, when you give up all actions that are motivated by selfish desire, please note, if your actions, if your work is motivated by selfish desire, then that work can never be sannyas. But if you are doing that work without any selfish desire, then that the wise understand as sannyas. And then he says, when you give up the idea of all fruits of your actions, this is what we know as tyaga. So there is sannyasa and there is tyaga. Sannyas comes when you abstain from all selfish desires before you begin your work, making sure that the work you're undertaking is not based on selfish desire. And the other is tyaga, so that when you finish your work, you are not anticipating nor are you greedy for or awaiting the fruits of your labor. So when you are acting, check yourself. Am I doing this out of selfish desire? When you finish the work that you've done, check yourself. If I don't get the fruit, will I be unhappy? So when you perform work, make sure that you're not doing it with selfish desire. Do it with the statement, Om Tat Sat. My Lord, hey Krishna, this is for you. This is an action I am offering unto you. It may be an email you're sending, it may be a meeting you are attending, it may be any kind of work that you're doing. But when you're doing that work, you're doing that with no selfish desire, and you're doing that with the attitude Om Tat Sat. I always recommend that you should close your eyes for even a half second, so that you don't appear like a fool or a madman to people around you. It's very important to conceal your God madness. Just as important as it is to be God mad, it is that important to conceal your God madness. So close your eyes for half a second before people notice what you're doing. See the feet of Krishna in your mind and offer a flower at his feet. At the end of the day, close your eyes. Pick up all the flowers you have scattered at his feet. Make them into a garland and put them around Krishna's neck. And the lighter that garland, the lighter that garland, the heavier your heart. The heavier that garland, the lighter your heart. That is the law, my friends. That is the law. So before you perform the duty, see that it is not a selfish desire. Offer it as a flower at Krishna's feet. Say, Om Tat Sat, my Lord Krishna, this action is for you. And at the end of the action that you perform, check whether you are unhappy because of something you were expecting that you did not get. Oh, she should have thanked me. Oh, he should have appreciated what I did. Oh, I should have got this for doing that. No, you have to act in a function of total renunciation and devotion. And tyag means you are not disturbed when you do or do not get the fruits of your labor. So, sannyas is internal. External sannyas is not recommended by Krishna. Even if you are enlightened, Krishna wants you to continue to work in the world in a spirit of devotion and renunciation so that you can set an example to the rest of civilization. The rest of people around you should see this is the correct way to work, even if you are enlightened. Further, when you perform that action, your mind should be detached from everything in the world. You should act without any selfish desire. You should offer it as a flower at the feet of Krishna. And indeed, you should offer it with the idea of Om Tat Sat. Hey Bhagwan, this is for you. And at the end of the action, check yourself. Is there something I am unhappy if I do not receive? Am I waiting for a thank you? Am I waiting for some reward? Was I expecting to have more pay? Was I expecting to have more fun while doing the work? Was I expecting to learn something? Was I expecting that I would achieve acknowledgement and reward? When all these check boxes remain unfilled, then you know that you are truly engaged in tyag. Just like when you are beginning the work, you are acting without any selfish desire, nothing for self, and the action you are performing in total absorption in your work as an action offered to God. So I will pause here. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me now.
Sure, sir. Good morning, sir. And I'll start with our first question. So, for a very long period of time, we have been confused about the actual meaning of freedom. I mean, I think for a lot of people have had this confusion regarding freedom, that when you are free from, not when you are free from things and, your duties and all, then you are supposed to be free. So, sir, what does freedom mean according to Bhagavad Gita?
See, once I was asked by somebody, so I'm not interested in all this Bhagavad Gita stuff and all, because I want the freedom to drink. I want the freedom to smoke. So I said, do you want the freedom to drink and the freedom to smoke? Or do you want the freedom not to drink and the freedom not to smoke? Which is the correct freedom? You tell me. Then he understood that freedom truly means to become free from the chains by which we have bound ourselves within this world. To become free means to become free from Prakriti, to become free from your vasanas, to become free from your sankalpas, to become free from your ichhas, to become free from your karmas, the repetitive patterns of thought, speech, and behavior which drag us repeatedly into difficulties and problems and suffering. So that is freedom.
Absolutely, sir. So we can say that, live in the world, but don't let the world live inside you. That is the conclusion of actually the Sanyasa and Tyaga that of today's session.
Any other questions?
Yes, sir, we have. So a lot of people have done and maybe still doing this, that when they say that when in the end that we have to, you know, leave everything behind, then why at the first place we engage with people and things around us?
No, I didn't follow your question.
So it is
A
like,
statement or is it a question?
so may I repeat this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when in the end we have to leave everything behind, even the body, then why at the first place we engage ourselves with people and things around us?
I told you we engage in this world around us to purify ourselves. We have been born with certain vasanas, we've been born with a certain prarabdha, we've been born with certain debts that need to be repaid. We have been born because God has created us for a purpose, and we are here to fulfill God's purpose for each of us. And therefore, even though we are going to leave this world behind, we have a responsibility to fulfill the purpose for which God has created us.
Means running away from responsibility is definitely not the solution, of course.
You can't, you will be coming back again and again and again, because that's a recurring debt. Would you give up paying your EMIs and you'll allow the interest to keep mounting, or would you like to pay it off and finish it off now?
Absolutely. And so, sir, can a person living in Grihastha ashram also become sannyasi while living with family, or achieve salvation?
Exactly, this is what Krishna is saying. Asakta buddhir sarvatra jitatma vigat spriha naiskarmyam paramam siddhin sannyasin adhigachat. That when you move around in the world with your mind not attached to anything, that is the true sannyas. That is the true sannyas. He also says, asakta anabhishwanga putra dara grihadishu. So he says, asakta, without clinging, without um, excessive attachment, without drowning your family with hanging on to them, without being a clingy person, yet doing all your duties towards your wife or your spouse or your son or daughter. That is knowledge.
Absolutely. So, with that, moving to today's last question. So, how does a person living in this world give up desires when, especially, you know, everything around is trying to, in the market is around trying to bring out your deepest desires, actually, especially nowadays in the era
So the
of.
first thing is stop exposing yourself
Hmm.
to things that arouse your desires. So stop visiting brothels, saying that I'm just going for a visit there. Stop going to a bar, saying that I am not going to drink, but I'm just going to hang around there, and so on and so forth. You just first have to avoid exposure to temptation. Then you have to keep the company of those people who are on the right path. Satsangatve nissangatvam nissangatve nirmohatvam. Nirmohatve nischalitatvam nischalitatve jivan mukti bhajagovindam bhajagovindam govindam bhajam mudamate. Very clearly Krishna says, this is in the words of Adi Shankara,
Yes.
that once you give up the company of wrong company, you give up kusang and you start keeping satsang. Keeping of satsang will automatically rid you of kusang. Keeping of satsang will automatically give you a consciousness that is fixed on God. And when you consciousness is fixed on God, you will attain mukti within this life itself.
Sure, sir.
Okay.
So, yeah, sure, sir. So, thank you so much for today's session. And these were our questions for today. And we
So
will see you next
Jai
time.
Shri Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hari Om.
Hari Om, sir. Thank you so much.